I never thought I would be the mother who had to break into her own daughter's life on Christmas Eve. For 5 years, I had watched Emily drift further away, swallowed whole by the Harrington name, the Harrington money, the Harrington rules. I told myself she was happy. I told myself a 34-year-old woman knew her own mind. I told myself a lot of lies, and every time I swallowed one, a little piece of me curled up and died inside. But when the text came, not from Emily's phone, but from Victor's, saying, "Emily is fully honoring Harrington family Christmas this year, perhaps a short visit in January if our calendar allows," something inside me finally shattered. Our calendar. As if my daughter needed her husband's permission to see her own mother on the one night that used to belong to just us. Hot chocolate, terrible Christmas movies, and her head on my shoulder while the snow fell outside our little house in Somerville. So I drove through the worst nor'easter Massachusetts had seen in a decade, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle, knuckles white on the steering wheel of my old Subaru. The heater was barely keeping up. Every breath fogged the glass. I kept seeing her face the last time we'd really talked, 3 Christmases ago. Her eyes bright, cheeks flushed from laughter, telling me about a source who had proof City Hall was taking bribes. That girl felt a million miles away now. The gates to the Harrington estate outside Concord were open, unusual for a family that treated privacy like a religion, and I took it as the sign I had been praying for, even though I hadn't prayed in years. I found her on the front portico, barefoot in a thin silk dress the color of champagne, arms wrapped around herself while snow collected in her dark hair like someone had scattered salt across it. Emily. My brilliant, fearless daughter who once chased corruption scandals across 3 states for the Globe, sitting alone in sub-zero darkness because she had dared to speak out of turn at dinner? The shock hit me so hard I almost threw up right there on the marble steps. My stomach lurched, acid burning the back of my throat. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my child. Emily? My voice cracked in the wind, raw and small. She looked up, eyes glassy, lips already blue. For a second, she didn't know me, and that was the worst part, like looking at a stranger wearing my daughter's face. Then recognition crashed over her, and she started to cry without sound, shoulders shaking so hard I thought she'd break apart. I ripped off my coat and wrapped it around her, the wool instantly soaked through. Her skin was ice under my palms. "How long have you been out here?" "I don't know," she whispered, teeth shattering so violently I felt it in my own bones. "An hour? Maybe longer?" Victor said I needed to contemplate my gratitude. She tried to laugh, but it came out a sob. Gratitude for what they give me. Gratitude? If my story resonates with you even a little, if you've ever felt that slow, suffocating loss of someone you love, if you've ever swallowed your own scream so many times you forgot what your real voice sounded like, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me. There are more stories like this one, and I don't want you to miss the next. I have carried her to the car, heater blasting, emergency blanket from the trunk tucked around her legs. The seat warmer glowed red under her. I could smell the faint metallic scent of extreme cold coming off her skin. Through the massive palladium windows, I could see them all. Victor, his father Reginald, the brothers, the perfectly dressed wives, laughing beside a 12-foot tree that probably cost more than most people's cars. Champagne flutes catching the firelight, not one of them sparing a glance for the woman freezing 20 feet away. That was the moment I stopped being the polite, boundary-respecting mother-in-law and became something entirely different, something dangerous. Inside the car, Emily kept murmuring, "I can't leave, Mom. You don't understand what they'll do." Her fingers clutched my sleeve like a child. "No," I said, voice shaking with rage I didn't bother to hide. I understand exactly what they're doing, and it stops tonight." I meant it so fiercely, I scared myself. She leaned her head against the cold window, breath fogging the glass in frantic little puffs. "They'll say I'm hysterical, that you kidnapped me, that I'm unstable." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw the terror flicker across her face, the terror that maybe they were right. "Let them try," I said, and I sounded calmer than I felt. We didn't go far, just to the Concord Colonial Inn, where I had booked a room on the drive over in case everything went to hell. The lobby smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. Christmas carols played softly overhead, mocking us. The night manager took one look at Emily, barefoot, blue-lipped, wrapped in my coat, and upgraded us to a suite without a word. His eyes met mine for a second, and I saw the quiet understanding there. He'd seen this before. While she thawed in a scalding shower, I ordered soup, grilled cheese, anything warm. The sound of the water running was the loudest thing in the world. I stood outside the bathroom door, palms pressed to the wood, listening for any sign she was okay. When the water finally shut off, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When she came out in one of the end's thick robes, hair dripping, some color had returned to her face, but her eyes were ancient, older than mine, and I'm 59. "Tell me," I said quietly, handing her a mug of tea that steamed between us like a truce. She stared into the fireplace, flames dancing across her cheekbones. "It started small," her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it in years. "Comments about my reporting being too stressful after the wedding, suggestions that real Harrington wives supported their husbands publicly without contradiction. Then Victor started screening my texts. Then my friends became unsuitable influences." She swallowed hard. "By year 3, I wasn't allowed to drive alone. By year 4, I'd stopped writing entirely." She laughed, a broken sound that tore at my heart. "Tonight, I asked why they were evicting 200 low-income families for another luxury condo tower. Reginald said a woman's job was to look beautiful and stay quiet. Victor agreed, so they put me outside to reflect on my blessings." I felt the rage settle into something cold and precise, like a blade sliding into its sheath. They don't get to do this anymore. Her phone, still clutched in her frozen hand when I found her, had blown up. 47 messages, most from Victor, a few from Reginald, all variations on the same theme. Victor, 8:12 p.m. "Darling, enough reflection. Come inside and apologize properly." Victor, 8:27 p.m. "This is embarrassing for the family." Reginald, 8:41 p.m. "Disloyalty has consequences, Emily. You know this." I took the phone from her trembling fingers and turned it off. The silence that followed felt holy. That night she slept 12 hours straight, the deepest sleep she had had in years, she told me later. While she slept, I sat at the little desk with my laptop and opened the encrypted folder I'd kept since the engagement party 5 years earlier. Operation Vanguard, shell companies in Delaware and the Caymans, bribes routed through fake environmental charities, over $28 million in consulting fees that coincided perfectly with zoning approvals. I hoped I would never need it. I was wrong. And part of me had always known I would be. When Emily woke on Christmas morning, she looked like someone emerging from a long illness, pale, fragile, but awake. Sunlight slanted through the curtains, catching the melted snow dripping from the eaves outside. She sat on the edge of the bed, robe pulled tight, and just looked at me for a long time. "You really have proof?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Enough to send Reginald to federal prison for the rest of his life if he ever lays a hand on you again." She stared at me for a long moment, eyes filling with tears she didn't let fall. Then quietly, fiercely, "I want a divorce, and I want them to pay for what they did to me, to all of us." I nodded, throat tight. "Then we fight." She reached for my hand, fingers still cold.
Together? Together. I squeezed so hard I felt her bones. Always. By noon, Victor and Reginald were at the inn, flanked by their attorney, Charles Langford, faces arranged in perfect theatrical concern. The manager called up to the suite, voice apologetic. I told him to send them away. He informed me they had already involved local police with a welfare check. Let them come. I opened the door still in yesterday's clothes, hair unbrushed, fury barely leashed. The hallway smelled of pine cleaner and desperation.
Pauline, Reginald began, voice dripping patriarchal benevolence, this unfortunate episode has gone far enough. Emily belongs at home with her family on Christmas. Funny, I said, tasting iron in my mouth. I was just thinking the same thing. Emily stepped forward beside me, wrapped in the inn's robe like armor. She had pulled her wet hair into a knot, droplets still slid down her neck. I'm not going back, Victor. His mask slipped for half a second. Shock, then something darker. Possessive. Don't be dramatic, darling. You're overwrought. One night with your mother, and you've forgotten your place. My place, she repeated, tasting the words like poison. You mean the portico in a snowstorm. Charles Langford cleared his cufflinks, adjusting his cufflinks. Mrs. Harrington is clearly not herself. We have reason to believe undue influence. Save it, I cut in, voice low. We'll see you in court. Reginald's eyes narrowed, the temperature in the hallway dropping 10 degrees. You have no idea what you're starting. No, Emily said, and her voice didn't shake anymore. You have no idea what you started 5 years ago when you decided a woman's opinion was dangerous. I closed the door in their faces. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot. That small act, shutting the door on Reginald Harrington's smug certainty, was the first taste of power I'd felt in years. And it was delicious. Like the first sip of coffee after a sleepless night. Like blood finally rushing back into frozen fingers. Over the next 48 hours, we built a fortress, brick by quiet brick. First, I called Rebecca Morrow, the most feared divorce attorney in New England. She answered on the second ring, even though it was the day after Christmas. She owed me from a corporate case 10 years earlier, where I'd saved her biggest client $40 million. She took Emily's case without hesitation, voice sharp with the kind of anger that only comes from recognizing your own story in someone else's. Then Marcus Park, cybersecurity genius and another grateful ex-client. He swept Emily's phone and found 3 separate tracking apps, plus remote access to her camera and microphone. Victor had been watching her sleep for years. When Marcus showed us the logs, timestamps of Victor pulling up the feed at 2:14 a.m., 3:07 a.m., 4:22 a.m., Emily went so pale I thought she'd faint. She wrapped her arms around herself like she could still feel his eyes. Rebecca filed an emergency ex parte restraining order on December 26. Judge Marisol Ortega granted it at 4:17 p.m., barring Victor and any Harrington from coming within 500 feet of Emily. Copies were served at the estate before dinner. I pictured Reginald's face when the process server handed him the papers beside the 12-foot tree and smiled for the first time in days. Their response was swift and predictable. A petition claiming Emily suffered from dependent personality disorder, exacerbated by maternal enmeshment. They requested immediate psychiatric evaluation and temporary guardianship, for her own protection, of course. The filing was 37 pages of lies dressed in clinical language. We were ready. Dr. Layla Hassan, court-appointed psychiatrist with zero tolerance for coercive control nonsense, evaluated Emily the next morning in a quiet office that smelled of chamomile tea and integrity. Emily came out 3 hours later, looking exhausted but unbroken. Her report landed on Judge Ortega's desk by noon. No evidence of psychosis, dependency, or incapacity. Patient exhibits classic presentation of prolonged coercive control with excellent insight and strong desire for independence. The guardianship petition was dead on arrival. I read the judge's denial twice, just to feel it settle in my bones. But the Harringtons weren't finished. On December 28th, they escalated. A smear campaign whispered to society columnists, troubled heiress,
history of emotional instability, overbearing mother. A concerned source leaked that Emily had been hospitalized twice for anxiety. She hadn't. I saw the lies blooming across Twitter like mold and felt something inside me go very still. Rebecca countered by filing an intent to sue letter for defamation, attaching the security footage Marcus had pulled from the estate's cloud backup. Timestamp 7:11 p.m., Christmas Eve, Emily locked out, barefoot, snow falling in thick curtains. Timestamp 8:49 p.m., me arriving, running, slipping on ice, screaming her name. 1 hour, 38 minutes in 21-degree weather. The footage leaked to Channel 7 that night. By morning, #Harrington Christmas was trending, and strangers were leaving candles on the estate's front steps. That was our opening. Emily had kept a journal, hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Jane Eyre, for 4 years. Sparse entries, careful wording, but devastating in aggregate. Dates, quotes, punishments. December 12, 2022. Victor took my car keys for 3 days because I smiled at the barista too long. March 3, 2024. Reginald said if I ever embarrassed the family again, I would learn what real cold feels like. She read them aloud to Rebecca in a voice that started shaking and ended like steel. We paired the journal with Marcus's deeper dive into the estate's network. Using credentials Emily remembered from watching Victor log in when he thought she was asleep, his fingers moving in the same careless pattern every time. Marcus found the motherlode, the Vanguard files, every bribe, every threatened official, every contingency plan for silencing dissent, including a 47-page manual titled Integration of Marital Assets, Behavioral. Section 14 was entirely devoted to Emily. Objective: complete compliance by year 5. Methods: progressive isolation, financial dependence, calibrated punishment, positive reinforcement for submission. Milestone 4 achieved. Subject terminated professional identity. Milestone 5 pending. Conception to ensure permanence. Reading it together in the safe apartment Rebecca had secured, Emily went very still. I watched her face cycle through horror, recognition, and finally a kind of grim triumph.
They had a timeline, she whispered, fingers tracing the words on the screen. For breaking me. I put my arm around her, felt her trembling turn into something else. They failed. No, she said, voice hardening until it could cut glass. They just ran out of time. On New Year's Eve, we went public. Rebecca held a press conference outside the Middlesex County Courthouse. The wind whipped Emily's hair across her face. She didn't brush it away. She stood beside Rebecca in a simple black coat, hair pulled back, no makeup, every inch the woman the Harringtons had tried to erase. She read a short statement, and I've never been prouder. For 5 years, I was systematically isolated, surveilled, and punished for having thoughts of my own. On Christmas Eve, I was locked outside in a blizzard for questioning a business deal that will displace hundreds of families. This is not tradition. This is not discipline. This is abuse dressed up as family values. I am divorcing Victor Harrington. I am returning to my career, and I will not be silent while the Harrington family continues to hurt people, whether it's the tenants they evict or the women they marry. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Rebecca raised a hand, calm as winter steel. All relevant evidence, including financial crimes totaling over $30 million, has been turned over to the Massachusetts Attorney General and the FBI. Behind us, projected on a screen, were selected Vanguard slides, names redacted, but the pattern unmistakable. By midnight, the story was everywhere. The Globe, the Herald, CNN, the Post. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. We saw Emily. We're so sorry. We're here. The fallout was immediate. Reginald's board called an emergency meeting and forced his resignation to spend more time with family. 2 city council members announced they were returning suspicious campaign contributions. The luxury condo project was frozen pending investigation. Victor tried one last time. He showed up at the apartment building with flowers and a handwritten letter begging forgiveness, promising therapy, promising change. Security escorted him out. The restraining order held. Emily watched the security footage later and didn't cry. She just nodded once, like a chapter closing. Emily moved into a small loft in Cambridge that spring. She took back her maiden name, Emily Carson, and accepted a senior investigative position at ProPublica. Her first major piece, published that fall, won a Pulitzer citation. When they called her name at the ceremony, she looked straight into the camera and said, "This is for every woman who was told her voice didn't matter." Sometimes late at night, she still wakes up reaching for a coat that isn't there, feeling phantom snow on her skin, but then she remembers she is warm, she is safe, she is free. And every Christmas Eve since we spend together, no permission required. We light a single candle in the window, a quiet reminder of the night I found her in the dark. The flame flickers, steady and gold, and we sit in silence for a while, just breathing the same air. If you've ever been locked out, literally or metaphorically, if you've ever had to fight your way back to yourself, I need you to know you are not alone, and you are stronger than they ever wanted you to believe. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if my daughter's fight gave you even a flicker of hope, subscribe and stay. There are so many more stories to tell. You are not alone, and you never have to be cold again.